Welcome. I'm Coach Jeff Doobie, and this is your Fit Coach Tip of the Week, filming from On Deck Training Center in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. The topic for today is 5 phases of sprint mechanics. Why this is important is most athletes that come to us, they have strengths and weaknesses in their sprint cycle. What we see a lot of times is an athlete with a really good start, not so good finish, or a not so good start, really good finish, and at the end of the day, they're not even sure what to think about as they're running. So that's our job, is to educate them on the phases of the sprint, and more importantly, how we can change their cognitive thinking to get them to reach that maximum performance. So as you look here at the phases of the linear sprint, or linear speed I have on the board behind me, we're going to talk about the 5 phases. And those phases are your starts, followed by your acceleration, transition, up to max speed, and then deceleration process. Now, it's important to understand each one of these 5 phases of the sprint individually because injuries do occur in a sprint. And typically, people aren't aware of this, typically they happen in deceleration phase. We're going to get to that, but understanding how to reach full maximum speed first is vital in reaching your max performance. Any athlete of any sport can benefit from understanding these 5 phases to the sprint. So first off, I want to talk about your start. Your start is your initial burst, that initial jump, if you will, that powerful first 1 or 2 steps into the sprint cycle. We mark that off as far as 0 to 2 yards. Most athletes don't even know how to do this, so I don't expect them coming in to know how to start. Most athletes just take a first step and they're actually into acceleration, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Again, can't stress enough, all my athletes, I don't care if they're swimmers, golfers, field hockey, baseball, football, you can go on and on, they can all benefit from a start. One of the things that my coaching style is, we have coaching cues. We have hundreds of coaching cues. One of the coaching cues I use a lot with teaching the start is what I call double foot force application. We teach the athletes about ground reaction forces, and what that means is however hard you push against the ground's going to be pushing back against you. See, we do a lot of physics when it comes to educating our athletes on how to be faster. So with the physics, with the ground reaction force, and applying that force through double foot force application in that start, you're able to launch the athlete into their first step. So the athlete actually is physically jumping into that start. The next phase is going to be acceleration. Now, acceleration happens from when that foot lands, or your first 2 steps, up into full acceleration. This happens in 10 to 12 yards. Acceleration is the art of pushing your body. It's getting your body up through that slow portion of a sprint up to full acceleration as fast and efficiently as possible. We teach this through body lean. One of the coaching cues we have is you run downhill. You're like an airplane taking off. We also have coaching cues about your center of mass and center of gravity. We spend a ton of time talking about your center of mass, and when you accelerate, you have to drive those feet behind your hips, behind that center of mass, to launch your body forward. We also talk about your center of gravity, which is gravitational force pulling down on you. But if you're able to lean into it, that gravitational force actually pulls you into the direction you want to go, hence aiding in your ability to accelerate. Next up is called transition. Now, the transitional part of the sprint is honestly what most athletes do second nature. They don't have to think about it too much. They just kind of do it. Most athletes have a pretty good transition. We can always tighten it up. Now, that transition is coming from full acceleration up to full max speed. It's basically that body angle is coming up, and as you're getting higher, the legs are starting to cycle over more. And it's kind of like a tire rolling downhill. You're gaining inertia as you get going. Now, true max speed is one of these things that a lot of people don't completely understand, and we'd like to educate our athletes on it. True max speed doesn't occur until you're about 45 to 55 yards into a sprint. So a lot of our athletes never reach true max speed unless they're doing the kind of sports that you go for a long period of time. You know, our baseball players never really reach true max speed unless they're getting tested for a 60. A lot of our football players don't. A lot of our lacrosse players don't. The track athletes will, depending on their event, but you know, it's one of these things to understand what max speed is and where it occurs. If you feel like you hit max speed at this 20 to 25 yard point, then you're not reaching max speed yet. You haven't even touched it. You're not able to fully accelerate and get out of transition to reach max speed. So like, for example, a football player running a 40-yard dash. you're really getting done that 40 and you're not quite there yet. All right, so your mindset is thinking, I wish I had more room to go. I wish I had another 5, 10 yards, because you're accelerating all the way through. All right, so that's kind of the mindset we're talking about. As far as this transition up to max speed, I love using the mindset and the coaching cue of air time is fast, ground time is slow. Anytime you're able to launch your body, you're going to be airborne, and that's going to be good for speed. That ground time, you want it to be quick, and you're cycling through to project your hips. Okay. I also use a coaching cue. Quiet is fast. Noise is slow. Again, that's kind of quiet means you're airborne. Noise means that foot is hitting the ground. Another thing I like to tell my athletes, especially if they're on a track or a turf surface, is listen to your feet. You want to hear the pitter-patter picking up. Again, like that tire rolling downhill. As you start up, it gets quicker, 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 faster, 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 up into max speed, which doesn't occur for 45 to 55 yards in. Okay? So the first 4 phases, you have your start. That's going to be your first 2 steps, talking the first 1 or 2 yards. That acceleration, body's starting to come up, airplane taking off. That happens 10 to 12 yards into a sprint. Into your transition, that step over, that cycle, that full action as you're going through, tire rolling downhill, up into max speed, which happens at 45 to 55 yards. Now, an athlete that reaches max speed, you really can't maintain max speed for that long in a true sprint. So you're going to start the last phase of the sprint cycle, which is deceleration. Again, this is where injuries occur. This is where people pop hamstrings. This is where people have that shearing force come across their knee. We like to educate our athletes how to start to apply those braking forces. And with the braking forces, you want to take it through your heels and your hips, and you're actually leaning back away from that center of gravity. If that makes sense, then a lot of this is going to be plugged together. One of the things I always ask all my athletes on day one is, hey, when you're sprinting, what do you think about? Most of them always give me the same answer. Coach, I don't think about anything. I just think about sprinting down to the finish absolutely as hard as I can. And that's great. We love effort. But we can all agree that our brain controls our body. So this is just one way that we start to make our athletes better. We teach them, we educate them about the phases of a sprint. Coaching cues to apply the principles, we're trying to get them to make them faster and quicker and more agile. And all these great things that we can do for our athletes. And at the end of the day, we're trying to reprogram how their brain controls your body, which takes time, but with the right application, the right coaching style, and the right recipe, these athletes can really achieve pretty awesome new goals. So again, I am Coach Jeff Doobie, and that's your Fit Coach Tip of the Week.